Hey everybody, welcome back to NoteWorth. I am your host, Connor Ehrich. Also, I am an A&R and manager for those of you who are new and tuning in. I'm a junior at Sarah Lawrence College and I'm 20 years old, but I have been exploring artist exploitation, more specifically in regards to how artists are compensated in the digital era of streaming and what that kind of looks like for artists. We've gone through a lot of different topics: pay-to-play shows, streaming models, label structures, and I've talked to a lot of different people from A&Rs and managers to artists, and I'm going to have more people on to talk about the issue. But before we continue to talk about the issue, I thought it was important to at least start to discuss what a world would look like in which artists hold the majority of influence in the music industry and labels become less influential, at least as they exist today. So, kind of going through the current problem of what's going on, I'm going to be talking about sustainable solutions and what that looks like outside of the abstract, how we can concretely put that into place, and what a world would look like in which these actionable steps are taken. So, the problem is the current music industry is a lopsided house of cards, with artists, the foundation at which the entire industry rests upon, precariously balanced at the bottom. Labels were originally intended to empower artists, and they used to be absolutely necessary, but now they've become gatekeepers and don't hold anywhere near the same level of importance in regards to the actual process of putting out music. They take a hefty cut of the pie while artists struggle to make ends meet, despite the fact that the artists are creating the product and not the labels. This imbalance has really deep roots. Since the dawn of the record industry, labels have wielded immense power. Originally, when it was vinyl systems, labels basically were the ones printing and sending out the vinyls. They controlled distribution, marketing, and a lot of time an artist's creative direction because there were no streaming platforms to upload on. You had to go through these labels to get your vinyls printed at a large level. This system, though evolving, still maintains to prioritize profits over the artists who are generating the music. In the digital age, a double-edged sword was kind of created. While the potential for direct-to-fan engagement was there and should have been the point at which artists took control, major labels adapted to maintain control over the recording industry. Pro rata streaming, for example, rewards big names with massive followings while leaving smaller, diverse artists struggling for scraps. The current music industry fails to serve the best interests of artists, and what ails the system is a lack of transparency largely. Artists are frequently kept in the dark about finances, streaming payouts, and market strategies. It's time that we kind of look at why that is and how it's affecting artists in today's day and age. In regards to their actual finances and what these royalty payouts look like, a lot of times the information is extraordinarily convoluted, and the artists are not provided with the financial education to have the literacy to understand this, especially since these are usually written by really good lawyers in intentionally confusing abstract obtuse terms. Traditional record deals prioritize label ownership of intellectual property, even though they're not the ones creating the music. This leaves artists with a minimal stake in their own music, which is really sad because at the end of the day, if you're creating art, putting your heart and soul into putting this into the world, you should be able to own it and maintain power over it at the end of the day. It wouldn't be out there without you. So that's really important to me. And the final thing is the unfair compensation part of it, which obviously stems from the imbalance and the lack of transparency. The current pay structures basically leave artists struggling to make a living because the industry is just taking these huge wedges out of the middle. Artists are facing pressure to compromise their artistic vision as a result of this, and they have to align themselves with commercial interests, which really puts marginalized groups that are making art and more niche art at risk because it forces these artists to basically decide between whether or not they want to make a living and create art or make art that they actually want to put out there and defy these record labels or make art in a way that maybe isn't catering to the record labels. This fallout leads to disillusionment and frustration for artists. They feel undervalued and powerless in the system. And a lot of times that results in burnout, meaning they can't create more music because they just are so stressed out about the financial strain and what's going on and the fact that they don't know what exactly is going into their pockets. And yeah, that results in them struggling financially significantly And like I said before, having to cater more to that commercial kind of audience. When we force artists to cater to these specific audiences, we erase their artistic expression and are basically telling them that their stories don't matter and that we would rather talk about an image than their actual real life story, which is the reason people want to listen to them, presumably. Now that we've kind of talked about how record labels exist in the present and how that's impacting artists, it's important to talk about how we can move past that and if there are any good examples of artist-owned labels that are doing things right. And the first one that comes to mind for me is Top Dog Entertainment, which is Kendrick Lamar's label. He uses a profit-sharing model, and his artists have done extraordinarily well, but it's not perfect. And I think that there are ways in which artists that don't want to run their own label necessarily, but want to reap the financial benefits of having that control, can exist and support each other under a different kind of label economy. This label is not just about the business. The label that I'd be creating is basically a cooperatively owned label where artists have financial stake in the label, but there are a lot of nuances to that because at its face level, immediate complications arise. Those complications will be addressed, but first I want to talk about kind of what that would look like and what would happen if artists actually owned part of the label and weren't stuck in restrictive 360 deals or other restrictive deals that are focused on commercial viability and not on artistic expression. This label is not just about business. It's about fostering a community where artists thrive and building a transparent and equitable system. We can empower a new generation of musicians and create music that they're passionate about while achieving sustainable careers for the people who are actually running the label, because at the end of the day, a lot of artists sign to major labels because they don't want to have to run a label. They don't want to have to be in control of a lot of these aspects. And in this way, they're able to have a lot of control over not only their intellectual property, but their financial compensation without needing to be stuck in the weeds of owning their own label. Let's talk about what this will look like. The initial issues that come to mind when thinking about starting an artist-owned label are things like financial risk, expertise, and just overall what it would look like. We haven't really seen it at a large scale or in a way that is being pushed to a large audience and marketed to the people. The ones that are out there, they're not exactly perfect and people don't know about them. So the largest problem when it comes to an artist-owned label is financial risk. The way that we would prevent artists from having to carry this financial risk or being financially taken advantage of, while also making sure that as a founder, I'm not getting taken advantage of either, is first tiered investments. Artists would be able to buy in at a level commensurate with their career stage. Another way at which we would address financial risk is profit sharing guarantees, basically a minimum baseline profit share for all artists, ensuring that they're actually being compensated at the end of the day. And also loss sharing caps. People ask me when I bring this idea up to them, what happens if the label isn't doing well? How do you protect the artist from that? Because that is a large concern of artists. I want to have ownership, but I don't want to, put this huge amount of risk up there by myself. Basically, loss sharing caps limit financial responsibility of the artist while still ensuring that they have this influence and they have that ownership. In addition, expertise and management of this label, who's going to run it? How are they going to make sure that these artists are making good decisions while still allowing artists to make their own decisions when it comes to what's happening with their intellectual property? So there would be professional management, experienced industry professionals handling daily operations, and an advisory board where people would be able to provide guidance and mentorship to these artists. Another thing that would happen is a very strong push for financial literacy for these artists, basically showing that we want you to understand what's being put in front of you, especially a contract that is indicating what's going to happen to your life. For a lot of artists in my industry, rap, they're young when they're getting signed or they're young when they're blowing up and they don't exactly know what this language means, or they don't know that they should have a lawyer. So ensuring that artists have financial literacy and legal literacy is really important to making sure they don't get taken advantage of by the label or by other people outside the label. Another thing is decision making. So who's going to make the decisions in this label? Artists, we don't want an artist to have a monopoly over decisions. How does that work? There would be a voting threshold. So major decisions require a high percentage of shareholder agreement, and a retention of majority of the shares most likely would be kept between a few different people. For my personal idea, I've talked to two other girls about starting this music group, a commercial kind of music group that is community driven and artists have influence over. And for the three of us, we would probably collectively maintain ownership, and the rest of that stake would be open for artists. This ensures that we're not just ousted out of the own company unless there's a really good reason for one of us to be. We don't really want any sort of authoritarian middleman holding themselves at the top, especially someone who's not making the music. And that's the core of this, is that the people who are making the music and who are putting the music out there are important. Without them, labels wouldn't exist anymore. I mean, sure, labels were necessary at the very beginning to actually printing. That's very different than just uploading online. But now we're in the digital age where artists really don't need labels as much as they did before. So now more than ever, it's super important to ensure that artists have the control, because they're the ones who are putting stuff out there. Why shouldn't they have control over making the money that they want to make? A large thing is an exit strategy. Biggest problem with these large labels is how restrictive they are and how hard it is to leave when you are an artist stuck in a bad contract. So what about an artist who decides that this isn't for them, or that they want to move on to the next thing or establish their own label? Maybe they become big and decide they want to take it to the next level personally and actually run something. The large three things of the exit strategy, and then I'll talk about why departures actually benefit an artist empowered label, is buyback clauses. Clearly defined processes that would be established for the label to repurchase shares from departing artists, and right of first refusal for these labels to ensure that they can buy shares before external offers. Another thing that's super important is market-based valuations that basically ensure that fair pricing for both artists and labels is happening during share buyouts. The reason that artist departures benefit this label structure is it creates a community of shared knowledge and growth. Artists who leave this type of label to create their own labels will carry the value of transparency and artist empowerment. That will be how they came up and hopefully how they continue. This fosters a network of like-minded labels expanding the artist-centric movement, and again, putting artists at the center of the major labels and ensuring that nobody really has a monopoly over the music industry, because it shouldn't be that way. Another thing is it kind of cements our label's legacy. As departing artists find success, it validates this approach and attracts new talent and further strengthens the reputation of my label as a champion of artist ownership. We're able to set a precedent and hopefully allow people to continue it on a larger scale or on a different scale. This establishes that this structure works, and that's super important for creating a legacy that centers artists and not people at the top. The third thing is that it allows us to focus on community. This is more than a label. It is a community. When artists leave, the bonds forged with the label remain. Collaboration opportunities will exist and will lead to exciting cross-label collaborations, hopefully in the future. Financial resilience for this label, I will go into explaining next. Basically, how will we ensure that we're not just going to fall? Because a lot of this sounds really great in theory, but putting it on paper, how are you going to give artists all this power, both financially and decision-making, without a major share of the profits? The answer to that is by diversifying revenue streams and profit-sharing reserves. So my type of label wouldn't rely solely on artist income. I think that labels should kind of be more integrated into the day-to-day business of the artist, especially if the artist is empowered in this scenario and is not just under the control of a major label. We wouldn't rely on solely artist income. We'd be able to explore alternative revenue streams like, throwing shows, festivals, music licensing, artist management services, basically just to ensure that the label has other forms of revenue that protects the artist and also creates a brand for the label rather than just making it a record label, because this could just be more of a music group, something that is designed to push artists at every kind of stage and allow them to maintain that ownership and create a really close community of business partners that are working together. The second, half of that is profit sharing reserves. A portion of label profits would probably be set aside as a reserve fund. This basically means that whether any financial strain exists, this basically means that it can be used to weather any financial strain caused by an artist's departure. Those profit sharing reserves would be super important to the core of it. But, there are ways in which we can protect an artist owned label from falling through. And it's time that we do that. By embracing these strategies, artists empowered labels would build a sustainable and resilient model, not easily compromised by individual artist departures. In fact, such departures become a catalyst for future growth and empower the artist-centric movement even more. Why would an artist-empowered label be the choice for an artist? The first thing is artist ownership and control. This is the first step to ensuring artists have a say in the label's direction and share its success. Right now, labels succeed financially and the artists are restrained to this small loan most of the time, which they have to live off of and create music, but they don't even get to maintain their ownership of their masters. As the label is going up, they just kind of get these loans and they're screwed over. Obviously, not every contract is identical and every contract is different, but the status quo is that artists are continually being taken advantage of, especially at a young age. Another big part of this is community and collaboration. I've talked about this a lot, but the community of it all is so important. There really isn't a huge sense of community at a lot of major labels, maybe some of the imprints under those major labels, but they are extremely kind of fractured off. And it's important that these fractured off groups that exist can have power and, share ownership and foster a supportive environment for each other and artistic growth. And it would create more of a community that I don't really think exists under the current label structure, or I haven't experienced it. The last thing this is going to do is just challenge what's happening right now and inspire innovation. It promotes sustainability and centers the artist in their labor and their form. I mean, they're putting this out there. They should be the ones making the money off of it. Obviously, someone has to help them do that, but that someone who's helping them do that only exists because of the artist. And it's so important to recognize that and to financially recognize that as well and address that, to kind of, provide more nuance and address questions that people might have or that I would have if I was listening to someone explain it, is talking a little bit more about what that ownership looks like if I were to establish it with, say, the two people I've talked to it about. As the founding trio, we would hold a significant ownership stake in the company. That shared ownership would ensure that there is a strong foundation built on the commitment to artist well-being that would preserve stability. Also, our income would be directly tied to the label's success. For example, any bonuses we have would only come as a result of predetermined milestones like Grammy nominations or chart placements that would reward our A&R skills and our ability to nurture talent, while not taking advantage of these artists and their ownership in their music. A collective management fee as well, based on gross profits, incentivizes us to find and develop successful talent. Performance bonuses like this kind of make sure that we're being held accountable and that as A&Rs, we're pushing the label to be innovative as we continue to grow it. Transparency is the number one thing when it comes to this type of label. Open communication and reporting would be absolutely necessary to its success. And, complete transparency with artists regarding finances, streaming payouts, and marketing strategies would be just absolutely paramount to making sure that this is something that would work for both of the artists and the people that are founding it. Regular reports would outline the label's health and performance metrics to build trust and demonstrate that we're committed to these artists and we're committed to showing them that they can go up, based on who they are and not based on some commercially molded version of them. Our ultimate goal, creating a label like this, is not to create a hegemonic label, but to create collective successive artists across the board. and inspire a new era of artist-owned labels that hopefully shifts the world of artist compensation. A happy and successful artist roster is the foundation of a thriving label, and prioritizing artist empowerment alongside our own security creates an innovative and sustainable model in the music industry. But let's imagine a music landscape where this has actually happened and artists have been centered into the middle of label structures. What would that look like in the digital age? Major labels would no longer exert their iron grip on these artists, and artists would be able to stand tall, empowered, and in control. This is a glimpse into what that world could look like. An artist-centric ecosystem would come from the model of our label, becoming a blueprint for a wave of artist-owned labels and fostering a collaborative and supportive community for artistic expression. Fair compensation will become the norm because of this. Transparent profit-sharing models become the norm, ensuring artists reap the financial benefits of their success. Pro rata streaming would likely have to be reformed because these DSPs would be forced to reflect individual listeners and actually cater to the interests of the artists because they own the labels rather than, just catering to the big three. Direct to fan engagement would flourish under this system. DSPs like Spotify and Apple Music would be forced to adapt because with this less reliance on major labels, they would have to cater directly to artists, and they would establish advanced analytics tools, fan engagement features, and much fairer royalty structures because the artists would have the financial control, which is really cool to think about. And the reason why I've kind of started to dig into these topics and see if we can address them. When artists take the reins in their own career, they don't feel pressured to conform to commercial expectations, and they can actually make the music they want while still living sustainably, which doesn't happen right now. Any artist who is really catering to themselves, 99% of the time is not sustaining themselves in the current ecosystem. Because of this, genre explosion would occur, which I think is super cool. And I think it would kind of break down how genre exists and what it looks like. I think it would foster creativity and collaboration that maybe didn't happen before because of this kind of factioning of labels and of communities of artists. And artists would be much more likely to explore different genres if they didn't feel like their next paycheck was compromised because of it. I do understand that the artist-centric model is not without its hurdles, and that's why I've tried to address a lot of them today. The opportunities are so vast for artists if this was something that was pursued by people in power, and hopefully something that I can do when I graduate. It would promote sustainability for artists, discovery and connection, and generally just a more flourishing ecosystem of a music industry. People would be way more into the artist rather than the profit incentive on the business side, and that would change the game for fans. Building this new world requires a ton of effort and a ton of internal thought. As pioneers of this type of structure, we pave the way for artists, fans, and even forward-thinking DSPs to work together and dismantle this old system that has continually pushed down artists and pushed down artists that are marginalized even further. Creating a music industry that empowers those who create the music we love is the reason I'm on this podcast. And hopefully today I gave you a little bit of a vision of what an artist-owned label could look like, even if they aren't the ones making all of the major decisions, because artists don't really want to have to run a label. They don't want to have to do accounting, but we do want this to be catered towards them because, again, the artist exists without the label, but the label doesn't exist without the artist. And that's something to keep in mind. I really hope everybody enjoyed this episode of NoteWorth, and I'm super excited to talk to you guys next week to explore more in the realm of artist compensation and how we can start to solve the problems around it.